Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Book 2 of Cicero's On the Nature of the Gods, the Stoic character Balbus is going to make some arguments about God's existence, or the existence of the gods, that are going to strike us modern readers as a bit strange, but they make good sense within the framework of, we could say, ancient cosmology and Stoic philosophy. And so a number of these arguments, and there's quite a few of them, are going to be proving that the world itself, the mundus, the globe, is God in some respect, is divine. And in order to understand this, it's a little bit useful to know something about Stoic theology and cosmology. So the Stoics are, in effect, pantheists, thinking that the totality of the world, or even the broader cosmos, is going to be divine, rational, inhabited by a guiding logos, providentially ordering everything. So there's no God outside of the universe. And because the world is so centrally, pun intended, important, well, the world itself could be understood as God, and we might say even capital G, God, as the center of everything. And so he's going to bring up arguments that are being made by Zeno, the founder of the Stoic school, and says that, these can be offered in kind of a compressed form. So it was popular for the Stoics to offer essentially syllogistically arranged arguments, which then they could expand upon, as Cicero himself does. So here's one of the arguments that Zeno is providing. That which has the faculty of reason is superior, is melius in Latin, to that which does not have this faculty or capacity of reason. But nothing is superior to the world, therefore the world has the faculty of reason. We can say the world is rational. And he's going to go on from that and say similar arguments or similar lines of argumentation can be used to prove several other things about the world, namely that the world is wise and happy and eternal. And he says things possessed of each of these attributes are superior to things that lack them, and nothing is superior to the world. Now here's where the conclusion comes in. From this, it will follow that the world is God. Esse mundum Deum, right? So that's the first main argument that's being provided. The world itself is better than everything else or greater than everything else, so it has to have these qualities because it's better to have these qualities than not to have these qualities. Nothing can be better than the world, so the world itself is going to be God. And then he has kind of a variation on this theme with a slightly different argument that is being offered about parts. So the world itself is a totality, and we are parts, and everything else are parts within it. So he's going to argue this: nothing that lacks sensation, that doesn't sense, right? sensu carentis, can have a part of itself that is sentient. But the world does have parts that are sentient, so the world itself cannot be devoid of sensation. And he talks about being animate and rational. And so all of these things are going to lead us to saying, well, the world, again, must be God, right? Then he's going to have this long digression about natural philosophy and physics as well. Physicis id est naturalibus, natural philosophy. We don't talk about these terms in quite that sense, and we're definitely not relying upon an element theory similar to that of the ancient Greeks and Romans. But he is going to say, all right, there is an element that is this heat running through all things, and he's going to give some examples of that. And it's this all-pervading fiery element. And this is kind of stock Stoic philosophy as well. The divine logos can be understood as also being a fire spread throughout everything. Obviously, it's not exactly the same thing as what we think of as fire, but something more basic. And he's going to bring up Cleanthes, who's Zeno's successor, and he's going to give quite a few examples of this. And we don't need to go through all of that. He actually says, it would require a long discourse and a great many arguments to enable me to show, and then he goes on to talk about some of these points. What is he actually getting at here? What are we interested in? Well, he is going to say that the element that is holding the whole world together and preserving it. So, natura est igitur quae contineat mundum omnem eumque tuetur in Latin. And this is an element. Now, here's the upshot of it. This element is going to not just be some bare material thing. It's actually going to be, sensible, rational. It's going to have these sorts of important qualities, and it's going to be what he calls a ruling principle. So he says, every natural object that is not a simple substance, but a complex and composite one, has to have some ruling part. The Stoics called this the hegemonikon. And they thought that, animals had this, we human beings have this. This is the rational part of ourselves. And he says the part of anything which must and ought to have supremacy, the part that should stand above the others. He says that it follows that the element which contains the ruling principle of the entirety of nature must also be the most excellent of things, and the most deserving of authority and sovereignty over all things. So what is this? Well, this is going to be the world. It says the parts of the world possess sensation and reason. We already talked about this a little bit before. Therefore, it follows that the part that possesses the ruling principle must necessarily possess sensation and reason, and in a more intense and higher form. So, what can we conclude from this? The world possesses wisdom, and the element, this fiery element, which holds all things in its embrace, is preeminently and perfectly rational, perfectione rationis, and therefore, here's the conclusion, the world is God, and all the forces of the world are held together by the divine nature, the natura divina, are contained by it, really. So that's another argument that's being given along the same sort of lines. Then he's got another discussion, which kind of goes back to this parts thing. The world is actually better than any of its particular elements. So that means that it is going to possess wisdom. And what possesses wisdom of that sort? Well, it's going to once again be God. So, all of these arguments are leading to the same point. The world itself, as this wonderful thing, is going to be God. And then he's going to give one more interesting argument after he talks. There's a little digression here about the argument from degrees of being. So he's going to talk about things that are lacking, things not completely perfect. He says there's nothing else besides the world that has nothing lacking, nothing missing. Qui nihil absent. Literally, there's nothing that is not there for it, but is fully equipped and complete and perfect in all of its parts. So, optum, perfectum, expletum, quae. These are all sort of characteristics of it. The world has everything that the world could possibly need. It should, because it's the world, right? So what can we say about this? Well, he says the world itself embraces all things, and nothing exists that's not within it, so it's entirely perfect. So it doesn't lack what is the best. So what is indeed the best, the optimum? Well, intelligence, mente, and reason, ratione. Nothing is greater or better, melius, than these. So the world must possess these. Now, if the world does in fact possess these, that's going to lead you, as these other arguments did, to the conclusion that the world is God. And then he throws one other consideration in there. He says, nothing is better than virtue. Therefore, virtue is also going to be an essential attribute, a proprium of the world. And so he says, since the world possesses virtue, it is wise, and consequently, the world is divine. So we're seeing the same kind of argument being repeated with some variations. Cicero has Balbus devote a lot of discussion to this. We could ask the question, why? And perhaps the answer is partly in the quirks of Stoic cosmology, but also in the fact that the Stoics are a school that's not arguing against something like, later Christian theism or atheism or anything like that, but arguing against skeptics and Epicureans and Aristotelians, although he does draw upon Aristotle a little bit in this account, and Plato. So maybe that's part of the context, to try to show that the totality that we call the world is actually something worthy of being called God, because it should have all of these attributes that God would indeed possess.